What's up, Chiefs Kingdom? Noah Gray here, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Josh's channel and check out showmefootball.com for more.
What is up, Chiefs Kingdom? Welcome back to another video on my channel. My name is Josh Fan of showmefootball.com and arrowheadaddict.com. Why am I making another video today for you guys? Well, of course, we have Chris Jones stuff to talk about. More developments in the Chris Jones saga. And trust me, guys, I am as tired of talking about this as you all are. But of course, it is my job to cover everything that's going on. And we have some new stuff to talk about. We've got some developments. So the first piece of news came from a couple days ago when Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk released an article saying that Chris Jones isn't trying to match or beat Aaron Donald. As the Chris Jones contract holdout has kind of dragged out, a lot of people have theorized that Chris Jones wants a lot of money. He wants money that the Chiefs aren't willing to dish out, and that he's trying to match Aaron Donald's contract or even beat it, all this other stuff. But Mike Florio put out this article with some interesting information in it. So let's talk about what he said. This was the most relevant excerpt from Mike Florio's article. He says, per a source with knowledge of the situation, the Chiefs have offered to replace the $19.5 million that Jones is due to earn in 2023 with $74 million over the next 3 years. Of that amount, $70 million would be guaranteed for injury, with the lower amount fully guaranteed. That's an average of $24.67 million and $7 million per year less than the Donald deal. Jones, we're told, isn't trying to get to Donald's number. In fact, he'd split the difference. The midpoint between the team's offer and the Donald deal is $28.17 million. So essentially, guys, the current offer that the Chiefs have out to Chris Jones would rip up his contract for this year that he's on, and it would give him a new deal over the next 3 years, which would actually make a lot of sense, especially if you look at this from an age value standpoint. What a lot of people are afraid of is paying Chris Jones past the point of him falling off or not being the same player. If you're ripping up his contract for this year and then making it a 3-year deal, so this year and then another 2 years, then that seems like a safe bet that Chris Jones is going to be productive within the length of his contract that you'd be giving him. Mike Florio would go on to say, though, that in other words, instead of $95 million over 3 years, Jones would take $84.5 million over 3, but the Chiefs are at $74 million over 3 years. The only issue is that $74 million over 3 years would still only be paying Chris Jones about $25 million per year, and I feel like he does want substantially more than that. So Mike Florio left some room for that negotiation in there by mentioning the fact that they'd be willing to meet in the middle. But also, when you read this article from Mike Florio, it reads as if the Katz brothers, Chris Jones's agents, leaked this information to make it seem like Jones is not the bad guy in negotiations. But then FS1's Nick Wright was on his show this morning, First Things First, and he said that, he doesn't get a ton of inside info, but Nick Wright is from Kansas City. He started up in Kansas City radio. He has some connections in Kansas City. So he said he did have some inside info on this, and from what he understands, Chris Jones not being there at this point is very surprising. And on the table, he has a 2-year fully guaranteed extension that's a little over $27 million per year. Chris Jones wants 2 years, $64 million, which would put him at $32 million a year. That's almost as much as Aaron Donald is making. And Nick Wright reports that Chris Jones and the Chiefs are about $9 million apart in negotiations, and that's quite the stark contrast from what Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk was saying. So essentially, this is all one big game of chicken still going on between the Chiefs side of things and Chris Jones' side of things. But of course, what all of this means as far as this week versus the Detroit Lions, and Ian Rappaport said this on NFL Network pretty much earlier today, that it's kind of hard to see him on the field this week against the Detroit Lions because the game is on Thursday night. If this was a Sunday game, things would be a little bit different. But even if Chris Jones and the Chiefs were able to come to a contract agreement by tomorrow, which would be the best case scenario, he wouldn't have practiced at all this offseason and leading up to the game. So it's just hard to see him being there against the Detroit Lions in week 1. And I warned everybody of this a while back. I said it back when it wasn't that much of a concern, and before Chris Jones came out on Twitter saying that he would sit out all the way up until week 8, which I still don't believe he's really going to do that. And I don't believe this will drag out that long. But I did warn everybody. I said, do not underestimate the possibility of Chris Jones sitting out regular season games. Chris Jones was really good friends with Le'Veon Bell, who did the same exact thing. And I know Le'Veon Bell has been in his ear saying, dude, do not play. That look what I did, and I ended up getting a bag from the Jets in free agency. And a lot of people have said that, you know what, Chris Jones, the sitting out makes no sense. Financially, it makes no sense because you're going to be losing the money that you're trying to make up in contract negotiations with the Chiefs right now. And yes, he would be losing money, likely the same amount of money he's asking for from the Chiefs right now. However, if you consider this in the long run, if Chris Jones is to hit the open market, he is going to get absolutely paid by somebody. He knows that. It only takes one team. Chris Jones knows the importance that he has to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs know the importance that Chris Jones brings, and that's why they're trying to get a deal done. But for everyone saying, oh, this financially makes no sense, it still makes a little bit of sense. Because if Chris Jones is to wait until the offseason and the Chiefs do not get a deal done, Chris Jones is getting a bag from somewhere. And whatever money he makes from another team is going to make the money that he's losing by sitting out look like pennies. But don't get me wrong, sitting out games and missing out on all these game checks, it's risky. It's not great advice that he's getting from his agents, but there is a reason for it. But real quick, since it looks like at this point that Chris Jones is unlikely to play versus the Detroit Lions in week 1, what does this mean for that game? On the surface, I'm sure a lot of fans are looking at this game and they're saying, oh, come on, it's the Chiefs, man. Like, they're chalking it up as a win. It's just the Lions. They were 9-8 last year. But the problem is the Lions had one of the best offenses in the league last year. And now the Chiefs don't have Chris Jones on defense. The Lions were third in offense right behind the Eagles and the Chiefs. They had over 6,000 total yards of offense. They ranked 11th in rushing, and they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round, who is an electric running back out of Alabama, and I only expect their running game to improve. They don't have Jamison Williams in this game, who's going to be out due to suspension for gambling, but they were also without him for about half the season last year as he recovered for a torn ACL, and they still finished top 3 in total offense. So the Lions are a scary matchup when you consider their offense versus the Chiefs' defense. The Chiefs' defense took a pretty big step forward in 2022. It's probably their best defensive performance of the Patrick Mahomes era, but the biggest reason for that step forward was the pass rush also taking a massive step forward, and Chris Jones headlined that. The Chiefs finished second in the league in sacks. Chris Jones had 15.5 sacks, which was a team high, and he also had the most pressures on the team. He accumulated 24.9% of the team's total pressures. But Chris Jones basically had a quarter of the team's pressures by himself. And the two that were closest behind him were Carlos Dunlap and Frank Clark. Those two are no longer here, which means it's going to be completely up to the young guys to generate pressure against the Detroit Lions offense. And while Jared Goff is nothing special at quarterback, if you're not getting pressure on NFL quarterbacks, most of them are going to sit back there if they have all day and they're going to dice you up. That's what happens when you don't have a pass rush. And this pass rush is going to sorely miss Chris Jones. I know a lot of people out there want to pretend that not having Chris Jones isn't going to matter. And look, the Chiefs are still going to be competitive while they don't have Chris Jones. But to pretend like the defense isn't going to take a drastic step back, you'd be kidding yourselves. This is a defensive player of the year candidate that we're talking about that's not going to be there. Also, keep in mind that Charles Omenihu is going to miss the first 6 games of the season due to a suspension, so they're not going to have him either. So the depth at defensive line is looking pretty scarce. And I mentioned all those pressures that are now gone if you don't have Chris Jones, but there was also a stat that was put out from NFL Next Gen Stats with Chris Jones on the field, this is over the past 5 seasons, the Chiefs have been first in the NFL in quarterback pressure rate. Without Chris Jones on the field, the Chiefs are 28th in NFL quarterback pressure rate. So you're basically almost going from first to worst just from taking Chris Jones off this defensive line. And I just don't think people are quite understanding yet how big of a deal that is, how massive of a deal it is that Chris Jones is not going to be there. You're just not getting the same type of pressure on the quarterback without him in the lineup. And then an underrated part of Chris Jones's game is his ability to defend the run. Chris Jones hasn't always been an elite run defender by any means, but last year was possibly his best season when it comes to defending the run. It's been more of an effort thing with him in the past. He doesn't love to defend the run, but he really embraced it last year and used his ability to shed blocks to be more effective in the run game. He graded out very high in run defense. And even if you don't want to call Chris Jones an elite run defender, it's still going to hurt with him not being there when you just look at the depth that's behind him. Tershawn Morton, Derek Nottie, like that's probably your starting interior. And Tershawn Morton's coming off a torn ACL, and Derek Nottie had a down year last year. I don't know who could actually feel great about that being your starting defensive tackle group for this game. And then behind them, you got Neil Farrell, who just joined the team last week, and a rookie in Keandre Coburn. I don't feel great about that. I'm not sure who could. The bottom line is not having Jones against the Lions and beyond creates a lot of problems for the Chiefs just because of how important Jones is to what they do on defense. If you're looking for some sort of bright spot, though, Steve Spagnuolo defenses typically start out slow. So not having Chris Jones for this first stretch of the season might not seem as that big of a deal, but it's still important that the Chiefs get something figured out eventually with Jones and they bring him back in the fold because this defense just is not the same without him, and they're not going to be able to reach their full potential this year without him. So hopefully all that gets done. But guys, those are the latest updates in the Chris Jones contract holdout saga, and those are my thoughts on what the impact is going to be of Chris Jones missing week 1 versus the Detroit Lions. But I want to hear from you down in the comments. Are you concerned about Chris Jones not being there in week 1 versus the Lions? Do you think the Chiefs and Jones get a deal done at some point here in the next few days? Let me know. Love to hear from y'all. With all that being said, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so more Chiefs fans can find this. And make sure you check out my work on showmefootball.com and arrowheadaddict.com. And I will see you all in the next one. Go Chiefs!